Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world. Thanks again so much for joining us. This is the eighth edition of our Clarity in a Time of Crisis webinar series. My name's Chris Adams. I look after research and insights at Miles Partnership, and it's wonderful to be with you again. Right since the start of COVID-19, we've been sharing critical lessons and insights from our leading research and data partners and also leading destinations from across the planet. And today we're delighted to be joined not by our typical two, but actually three thought leaders in destination marketing and in all things tourism. So let me briefly introduce each of our triple threat today. The first is a very old and familiar face, or I should say young and familiar face, shouldn't I, Amir? So Amir Elon is President and CEO at Longwoods International, our wonderful partner in researching the impact of COVID-19 on US travel. Of course, they do so many other things in the travel research space. So Amir, are you still safely tucked away at your home in Ohio?
Safely tucked away. Thankfully, we are pretty far along in our reopening, so I actually get to go out every now and then and safely, but celebrate the freedom.
Very good. So we'll be hearing from Amir shortly on the last 3 to 4 months of research that they've been doing. We've been supporting and sponsoring on how US travelers are thinking about COVID-19 and what is the outlook for the summer. We're also delighted to be joined by John Lambeth, President and CEO at Civitas Advisors. John's working with us on a very timely and critical study looking at tourism and DMO funding. He's going to be helping give us an update and introduction to that study, and we're delighted to have John. There's really no better person on the planet to bring expertise around tourism funding models, and what are the options and the future opportunities for DMOs in this critical issue. So John, whereabouts in California are you joining us from?
Well, thank you, Chris, and it's a pleasure to join you. I'm in sunny Northern California in Sacramento.
Very good, and I know you've got a great property there. So, and last but certainly not least, we're delighted to be joined by Inga Hulta, who until a few months ago was director at Visit Iceland. Inga's going to be giving us an update on that remarkable nation's response to COVID-19, how they're handling the pivot to domestic, but also some of a quick update on what's happening with regards to opening up to international visitors, which has been underway just in the last week or so. And she's also going to be sharing us some lessons from an earlier crisis that shut down tourism across the Atlantic, the volcano with the unpronounceable Icelandic name that I attempt to pronounce. So Inga, for joining us in the evening, but I bet it's still very light in Iceland, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Thank you, Chris, and thank you for having me today. I'm here in Reykjavik, in the capital of Iceland, and yes, it's still really bright, even though it's 7 o'clock, and it's actually not going to get dark tonight. It's been bright for the whole night now, and it's going to be like that until end of July, and we are really certainly going to enjoy that here after a dark winter for all of us.
Very good. Yes. So, well, we've got a remarkable lineup of speakers here, and we're first going to dive into the research with Longwoods International, and John's going to give us a quick introduction on what we're calling the Futures Funding research study. Then we'll connect with Inga in Iceland and take some lessons and takeaways on how they're handling the crisis. Thanks very much to all our supporters and partners on the webinar today: Destinations International, US Travel, DMA West and Southeast Tourism Society, and of course many of those have their own great webinar series, and we in fact curate webinars from the likes of Destinations International and US Travel on our own website. So please check out that resource of our COVID-19 Communication Center. please take advantage of the research that we've aggregated, not just from Longwoods, but a range of other partners that we've worked with. There's also case study examples and resources from across the world. And as I mentioned, we not only promote our own webinars, but we aggregate and summarize and hold all the recordings from partner webinars. So without further ado, let me pass over to Amir, and Amir is going to take us back over the last 3 to 4 months of the COVID-19 traveller sentiment research, and also look ahead on what are the prospects for the rest of the summer and into the autumn or fall in the US in terms of how a US traveller is thinking about their travel plans. So over to you, Amir.
Thank you, Chris. Well, hello again, everyone. Great to be back. So we've been doing this for about 3.5 months now, and thank you again to our friends at Miles Partnership for helping sponsor this ongoing study of American travel sentiment. With their partnership, we've been able to make this available to the entire industry and keep the study going. So thank you again. Let's take a look about what we see what we've learned over the last 14 weeks, and maybe think ahead a little bit too. So without further ado, just a quick reminder for those of you who haven't seen this before. Every week we go to our panel and sample 1,000 adults 18 and over, representative sample of the United States of American travelers, and ask them about 10 or 11 questions about their sentiment towards travel. So here come the numbers. With this past week, this was just fielded last week, every other Wednesday and Thursday. We started off weekly. Now we felt it was the time to move it to a bi-weekly study. So this reflects from the past 2 weeks here. 69% of travelers who indicated travel in the next 6 months to us are changing or have changed their travel plans in some form or fashion. How does that break out? About 45% have reduced their travel plans in some form or fashion, typically could be just a shortening of a trip and so forth. 37%, you can see just over a third, have canceled their trip completely, but that's not as bad news as you think. 29% have changed their destination to one they can drive versus a flying long-haul destination. And of course, as there's still no clarity about when the borders for international non-essential travel may reopen again, a lot of folks have been postponing their travels to Europe or elsewhere abroad for this summer or perhaps early fall, are changing those plans to domestic trips. They are getting away, but it's going to do it domestically. So the beauty of doing this for 3.5 months, Chris, as you and I know, is we get some great trend lines. We can see where how the journey has been. As you can see, we kind of peaked back in April 8th with 85% of travelers telling us they're changing their plans. Now we're back down to 69%, and we've kind of been there for the last 3 weeks. As you can see, this is going to be a pattern that's just started to emerge right now, which is the key sentiment indicators that we've been tracking have been generally trending in a very positive direction over the last month and a half or so, but now they're starting to flatten. And a lot of that is being caused primarily because of a lot of reports of at least 25 states as of this morning reporting over the past 2 weeks surges or spikes in the number of new cases of COVID-19, so forth. That is having an effect on the traveler psyche. So watch for this pattern just a little bit. I did tell you that about a month and a half ago, we started seeing the shift that the volume of people canceling their trips altogether has been eclipsed by the volume of people that have just simply reduced their travel plans, changed their, postponed or reduced the length of their trip. And as you can see, over the last 2 weeks, that gap has really grown between cancellations and changing plans. That's really, really encouraging to see. It's talking about that pent-up demand starting to be released. People are deciding, yep, I'm going. And that's a really encouraging thing for us. The Great American Road Trip. It never went away. It's been back, and now as we begin to reopen, it reopens with gusto. As you can see, people are changing from flying destinations to driving destinations. It's been a very, very strong constant from the beginning. And every week, if you've been following along, you know that we ask American travelers about 3 key factors that could greatly influence their decision to travel in the next 6 months. Transportation costs remains pretty negligible, 17%, saying it will greatly impact. Similar numbers on the economy, concerns about the pocketbook, and of course, no surprise, fear of coronavirus remains top, but that number is less than 50% now. As you can see, we peaked with 2/3 of Americans on April 1st telling us that that was going to greatly impact. Now we're down to just below half, but that's still almost half, so we have a ways to go still. The concern about the economy, again, it's been low. I'm happy to report that's the first indicator that's actually returned back to the same level that we were on March 11th when we started this survey. So that's positive. Again, if you're changing to road travel, if you're shortening the length of the trip, you're doing a lot of things that typically lower the cost of the travel to begin with. And of course, that combined with the fear of coronavirus, it's not about can I afford to travel this summer? It's about when am I going to travel? How am I going to travel this summer? So that's what we're seeing there. And of course, the $64,000 question we ask every week, are you going to be traveling in the next 6 months? And almost 3/4 of Americans say, yes, I am. And you can see that numbers, even through the worst parts of the crisis so far, has remained very strong. Again, encouraging. Every week, we also kind of take one question, we leave one of those questions to change around and take a look at key factors we want to dig a little deeper into. This week, we decided to take a look at health and safety factors that are going to be important to travelers when they're considering where they're going to go and what they're going to do there. Very, very clear here. You can see it's about making sure that you are communicating to those travelers what your plan is. How are you keeping them and your employees safe? They want to know what to expect, how you're going to provide a safe and clean and risk-free environment as possible for them, how you're going to mitigate that risk for them. Also, they expect you to wear those and use those PPEs. They want to hear that you're testing your employees or taking their temperatures before they show up for work. And of course, that all the social distancing best practices and so forth are being followed. You see all those ranked very, very high in terms of importance. And for the last month and a half, we have been tracking the perceptions of safety of travel. We're talking to these folks not just as travelers, but as visitors also. And you can see we remain very much a divided country in terms of support for opening up and welcoming new visitors back into our community. One's personal feelings of safety towards traveling outside their own community, and even their own personal feelings of safety in local dining and retail opportunities. How does this stack up? Well, you can see over the last couple of weeks, coinciding with those news reports of the surges and so forth, we saw a slight dip, about 5 points, in support for opening up the community to visitors. So again, those destinations that are doing safe pledges and things like that, it's really important to communicate to your local stakeholders about these items. Of course, of feeling safe traveling outside the community. Remember, this is a survey of traveling Americans, and only 46% are telling us that they are feeling safe. They agree or strongly agree that they are feeling safe to travel outside their community. We haven't crossed that 50% threshold yet. So remember, we have a long way to go. And at least in a positive indicator trending upwards, we do see these folks feeling a little bit more safe dining and shopping in the local communities. Of course, in many states, it's now been open very recently or for the past month. So people are dipping their toe in the water, and of course, as they dip in the toe in the water, they start easing back into a bit of a comfort level with it. All right, again, 3.5 months worth of data. We saw a lot of things. Several things have been constant throughout. The first one is that the recovery, just like reopening, is beginning at home. People dip the toe in the water local, and then they start heading out regional. It's the regional drive markets that need to be focused on first and foremost. I know this isn't brain surgery, but it just needs to be reinforced. Don't abandon your longer home market strategies, but you're going to have to delay or alter them. The first dollar to be made are really closer to home. Secondly, never forget, this is a health issue. You cannot discount your way into recovery. We've seen data earlier throughout the last couple months showing us time and time again that deals, discounts, and so forth, the consumer telling us they're nice to have. They want to find out information about where they can get a good deal, but that doesn't factor in heavily to whether or not they decide to go. You saw the economic pocketbook concerns. They're minimal. If you're giving away rate, you're giving away rate in most cases when you don't have to. And as we all know, if you give away a lot of rate, when things get better, it takes a long time to get that rate back. The fear factor is real, folks. You saw that time and time again, that hesitancy. Again, only 46% are telling us, of travelers telling us that they feel safe going outside their community. Again, it's a health issue. As we've seen the flattening on certain key indicators, it coincides exactly with the reports on what the media is telling us and the official health officials are telling us about the pandemic right now. So that's going to be the number one thing that sways folks' decision. So again, you've heard, if you followed along every week when Chris and I do our short little videos, this ball of pent-up demand continues to run right into this wall of fear. But the good news is some folks are climbing over that wall. They're going. That demand is starting to release, slowly but surely, but it's starting to release. And all this means that engagement has never been important than right now. And I'm not just talking about engaging with your visitors and telling them what to expect when they get here to your place of business. It's also your partners in your local business community and getting them all on board the same message, like those pledges and so forth. But most importantly, it is the resident. Please, 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 please keep the resident informed of the expectations you're putting on the visitors. Let them know how you're doing this, how you're planning to interact and transact in a way to help keep this community safe, not just from a revenue perspective. There. So that is my story. I'm sticking to it. And Chris, all yours, buddy.
Thank you so much. And I'd emphasize again that whole locals importance, Amir. I think until we can convince locals that it's safe to get out and about in their community, and particularly with the rise in case numbers in some of those potential visitor markets you want to target, it's going to be very challenging. And of course, you need your locals on site to make sure that when it's right, that it's a welcoming, conducive environment that supports visitors. So thank you. We'll have you back at the end for any questions. And without further ado, we'll move on to our second provocateur and influencer, opinion leader, and really one of the most important and timely topics right at the moment. So John, let's move on to talk briefly about the DMO funding project. We're calling it Funding Futures. This is a initial relatively high-level view of what is an absolutely timely and critical issue, which is tourism funding and DMO funding. In this environment, with the impact of COVID-19, some of the analysis done by one of the partners in the research, Tourism Economics, has estimated that we're seeing over $500 billion decline in tourism spending in the US alone. And that 38% of all the jobs lost are directly related to tourism and hospitality. So it's been called by US Travel the Great Travel Depression. That's got all sorts of implications. One of them is on funding to states, to counties, to cities, and of course to DMOs. And so with that as a backdrop, with Civitas Advisors, we decided that it was timely and relevant, in fact, critical to have a look at the future of DMO funding and tourism funding, and what are some of the options and opportunities that this moment of crisis brings. So we're taking a look at this initial study. I'll pass over to John to provide sort of a brief introduction and overview of the study, and then I'll come back at the end and we'll talk about some of the critical sort of timelines. Before I do, I just want to acknowledge the great support we've received from US Travel Association's Destination Council. They've made a contribution towards the cost. We've also had additional in-kind support from Destinations International in terms of providing access to data and research, and Tourism Economics. Adam Sachs and the wonderful team there at Tourism Economics are also a great partner. All of us, three agency involved, are donating most of our time at no cost to this project, and the report will be freely available, and we'll be running a webinar. So more on that in a moment, but over to you, John, to provide an introduction.
Thank you so much, Chris. It's a pleasure to be joining you today. And as you know, here at Civitas, We spend a lot of time thinking about bringing increased, stable, dedicated funding to DMOs, and that's why we're so excited to be partnering with you and Miles Partnership on this very important funding study at a very important time. And Chris, you've given some general highlights. I'll go into a little bit more detail of what we're providing, and then talk about why this study is important now and what policy decisions do we hope to influence or impact from the results of this study. First and foremost, there is a significant tax component to this. We did a study, I think as most folks know, 2 years ago with U.S. Travel Destination Council on looking at tax rates for 100 destinations around the country. As part of this study, we're going to be again partnering with the Destinations Council and updating all of that information. In addition, we're doing a series of focus groups with DMO leaders from throughout the country and Canada, asking them questions about what's happening to their funding now and what do they see happening as they go through the COVID crisis. In addition, we're doing some survey work and asking DMOs for their input on a number of issues related to funding and asking them about models that are working well and models that they're having challenges with. So let me first talk about the tax portion of this, if I could, and I'll go ahead and see if I can take control of the clicker here. And this was the report that I referenced that we did 2 years ago, looking at 100 destinations. And we did two things with this. First, we looked at the tax rates in all of these places so that folks would know how much are they getting charged when folks are coming out of a hotel room, what is their charge at checkout, and also looking at F&B charges. In addition, as part of this study, we looked at the expenditure side. How was that money being used? Was it going into the general fund? Was it being used for tourism promotion? And to no surprise, 49% was going straight into the general fund, and less than 20% was specifically being used on tourism promotion. So one of the great things is we now can take that information and use it as a benchmark and see what's happened over time. And one of the things we're finding already in our study is that there are quite a few changes in the tax rates, even in only 2 years. In fact, over 20% of the destinations have increased their tax rates within that short two-year period. So that's just to give you a kind of a little sneak peek at what some of those data points are going to be. We're already finding that there were changes out there. The focus groups that we're doing with DMO leaders have been fantastic, and we included 3 quotes on this page of folks that are leaders within the industry. I think most folks know Gary Sherwin from Newport Beach, and Susie Santo from Wichita, and Kevin Kane from Memphis, but each had their own take on what's happening now. Certainly Gary talked about the fact that we are at an inflection point. This is an opportunity to take stock of where you are and look for opportunities for change. And I think he really highlighted that. And as a corollary, Susie talked about DMOs being nimble and being able to make changes now in this environment and how important that is. And finally, Kevin really talked about the industry, the importance of the industry, especially when so many hotels and our lodging partners, their marketing and their sales efforts have been cut back, that now DMOs are more important than ever, and that DMO funding is more important than ever. Some of the key takeaways that we've had so far from our focus groups include, number one, the importance of reserves. And this goes without saying. It's obvious, but I can't tell you how many DMOs I've talked to that don't have any reserves, that weren't allowed to keep reserves. And we really need to focus into the future on how do we set up a program that allows for significant reserves for DMOs for crises in the future. Second, that COVID-19 is an opportunity. While it has been devastating to our industry, our elected officials right now want to help our industry and want to help us. So now it is a good time to be thinking about policy decisions that you want to impact and you want changed. We heard a great deal about diversifying funding sources, and that one size fits all does not work. And obviously, DMOs play different roles in different destinations, and those funding sources have to match those roles. Our groups talked about the difficulty in obtaining outside funding, and certainly something we've been talking about for a couple years now was the impending reduction in budgets for cities and counties, even pre-COVID. And now with COVID, we're seeing significant declines in state and local governments. In fact, I think we've just seen the tip of the iceberg on that, and we're trying to work with DMOs to get us prepared for what's ahead of us as we can. When those budgets get short, we know what happens. There's additional pressure to cut tourism promotion funding. And finally, based on some of the great work that Amir's done and some of the great work that Jack Johnson has done at Destinations International, we're talking more about a community-centric approach, right? Our funding has been so tied to our key partners, the hotels, but we recognize that really we need to be tied not just to the hotels, but also to the community. The community needs to be our clients. We need to be thinking about the shared community values that we have and how we're returning benefits back to the community, and also what kind of funding for us can the community support in addition to the hotel funding sources. And finally, this is my last slide, Chris. I know we've been all sort of over webinared, right? So we wanted to really just keep this to the meat of the matter today as best we could. The question is, why are we doing this now? Why is this an important time? And I'll go back to what I mentioned before. Our elected and appointed officials want to help our industry. And so much of the recovery programs that we know right now all require funding, whether they're tax breaks, whether they're grants, whether they're loans, those all require funding. And if you can think of policy decisions that you can get now, it's an excellent time to be asking for it. Because they're short of money, the funding is always going to be difficult. But are there policy changes that we can make now that we can take advantage of this opportunity we have with folks that really want to help us? And if you look on this slide at my bullets, 1 and 3 here, taking advantage of the political climate, and it's a great time to talk to electeds about getting help, perhaps restructuring, perhaps looking at new tools. It really is an opportunity that won't be there forever, right? That window is open now. As we get into recovery, that window will start to close. And finally, I'm really excited about having a historical benchmark. When we got into our study 2 years ago, one of the things we found was there was a lot of inconsistency about the way funding had been studied in the past. And one of the things we attempted to do was create a standard, create something that we could use into the future so that we would have good benchmarks and we could see and track changes in funding and changes in taxes and changes in allocations over time. And that's exactly what we're embarking on now. And hopefully that will set us up for success in the future.
Thanks so much, John. And just a brief overview of some of the key deliverables and dates that will be coming up in this study. So over the next couple of weeks, starting next week, we're going to be sending out to the 100 cities and all 50 US states a survey that's going to ask some critical questions in addition to validating the tax information collected about their future plans with regards to exploring different revenue models or exploring different roles and responsibilities, such as maybe a more active involvement in destination management. We're also going to be issuing a discussion document and seeking feedback in the latter part of July to some of the high-level options and opportunities for new funding models. We are taking a brief look internationally, and that includes looking in particular, for example, at Europe and some of the new models, some of the outcome-based funding models they've been exploring. So we'll be sort of outlining a number of the options and seeking feedback on those. And then we're distilling all of the desk research, the survey research, the feedback to the discussion document into a public summary. We'll be running a webinar with US Travel and the Destination Council. You can see the date there, Thursday, August 20th. It's going to be at 2 o'clock Eastern. And we'll be issuing the sort of public summary findings and recommendations at that point. So hopefully it'll be a valuable contribution to this critical area, but there's got to be a lot more work done at individual cities, states, counties, etc. John briefly mentioned Canada. I know we've got a number of Canadian destinations on the webinar today, and we are exploring with DMAC, the Destination Marketing Association of Canada, and Destination Canada, the opportunity to involve Canadian destinations. And we should have more on that in the next week or so. So there's our contact details. Don't hesitate to reach out, and John will join us at the end for any questions in our remaining few minutes. Thank you so much, John.
Thank you, Chris. And I wanted to say not only thank you to you and your team, but to Miles Partnership for working on this. And I wanted to say a big thank you to all the DMOs out there too. They've really helped us. They've answered our emails, participated in our focus groups. We've got a survey going out, and I just want to say thank you to everybody who's on the line today for helping us gather this information so that we can advance the industry.
Well said, John. Thank you so much. Okay, and John will join us a little bit later, but let me pass over to Inga, all the way from Iceland, where at this time of the year, as you said, the sun never sets. So I'll pass over to Inga to give us a overview of a past crisis that she was instrumental in helping manage while at Visit Iceland, and then some perspectives on how Iceland, but also some other destinations. I know you're going to briefly look at Denmark and my home country of New Zealand in terms of how they're grappling with this, and then a quick update on Iceland's reopening for international travelers. So thanks again for joining us today, Inga. Over to you.
Thank you, and I'm so excited to be with you, and it's been really interesting to listen to both Amir and John, and this benchmarking study sounds really, really exciting to have. To start with, like Chris said, I'm going to look at the past crisis and also to look at the sort of the domestic marketing, and also how we've been opening Iceland in the last few days. But if you start with the crisis in 2010, I don't know if how many of you remember the Eyjafjallajökull, the unpronounceable name, but we had a bit of a how do you say that, disruption here in Iceland in 2010 in April, where this was sort of the media was showing Iceland like this, covered with ash, and people really in a bad state in that sense. But it was also showing beautiful pictures from Iceland as well. But it was interrupting flights all over Europe, especially, and the reality, however, was this, that the ash was actually going away from Iceland. So the crisis were more in Europe and in the flight business around the world, interrupting people's life in the sense that they were not able to travel. This was a huge crisis for the Icelandic tourism industry at the time, because in April you're starting to thinking about the summer season, which was the most important season at the time. We only had around 500,000 tourists coming to Iceland a year, and we were starting to recover from the financial crisis. At this time in April, we were foreseeing that we will have minus 20% in incoming traveling to Iceland for the summer season. For the businesses, this was a shock, basically. So what do you actually do when you're in crisis? Well, we actually joined forces, and we managed to gather around 120 stakeholders together within almost a week. But first of all, we started what we called a crisis group, and a crisis group that was sitting down and discussing the situation around the world, how Iceland was in the media, and so on. And we all know that a volcano doesn't go on forever. So we decided to prepare a campaign that started immediately when it was safe to travel to Iceland. And at this time, we actually managed to get 1/3 of the nation to take part in the campaign, sort of harnessing the people power in that sense, and getting a very consistent message to the world. But I don't know if you remember the Inspired by Iceland campaign, but we have been going on with the Inspired by Iceland logo and the brand for over a decade now. And basically, at the end of the year 2010, we ended up with 1% increase for the year instead of 20%. And the people and the stakeholders were so happy with how we had been working together that we kept going for almost a decade. But if you look at today's crisis and wonder, what can we take out of the crisis in 2010? I take 4 points out of what we were doing at the time. We were trying to bring something good to the world. We were telling a positive stories from Iceland. We were telling something that was uplifting, relevant to the situation, basically. And I think that's still relevant today for today's crisis. We keep telling the stories of our destinations in a positive way and uplifting for everyone that are sitting at home and dreaming about traveling. We also created a crisis group, a public-private group, about 10 to 15 people, and we were reassessing the strategy. We were meeting almost daily in the beginning, and we kept meeting weekly for over a year almost, discussing the situation and what we could do better and so on. We also developed a platform for cooperation and support, and the platform is for all stakeholders. It's not only the public-private, the 10 people, it was for everyone, both the international platform and also other stakeholders. I sometimes say it's something where you can cry on each other's shoulders, basically. It's something where you can have that discussion. And also what we are doing today to network around the world, have a discussion with other countries, look at what other destinations are doing and so on. But in today's crisis, we also have to consider that the health and safety, we saw from Amir in the report, how important that is. And I think we have to consider that very well. Also the problems that we had before of it, because the sustainable development goals and the responsibility of destinations is not going away at all. So I think, reassessing the strategies and having a crisis group and cooperation, this is something that we can put into the same equation and work for us together. So that brings us to domestic travel in a way, because if you look at the domestic travel, in Iceland, the domestic market is not going to save the Icelandic tourism because we are only 350,000, and in the last few years we've had over 2 million travelers. So it's never going to compensate that. But in New Zealand, for example, you have 60% that is domestic travel. This is a completely different scenario from Iceland, but still you have some kind of a positive story to say and get people to move and get more kind of a positive towards positive towards traveling in that sense. And I had a look at 3 cases just to give some brief. And I've been writing some articles on LinkedIn, which you can find and get more information. And I have quotes on the slides that you can have a look at to get a deeper understanding. In Denmark, they have what they call Bare Denmark, Meget mere and Bare Denmark. That means it's just so much more than Denmark. And it's basically playing on the idea that when you say that you're not traveling abroad, you say, I'm just staying at home, but you're still traveling in your destination. So that's the idea of Bare Denmark. It's playing on the idea that you're not only in Denmark, you're doing something more. And the destination and the Visit Denmark is asking people to share what they're doing when they're just in Denmark. And giving people idea of that. And they have a competition going on. I think you can win $3,000 US dollars if you get a good picture on the website that they have created for this campaign. So they're trying to play on the variety and what Denmark has to offer in a positive way. If you look at Iceland, it's a bit of a different kind of approach. There's a domestic campaign going on, which is basically just encouraging you to travel in that sense. But what is a bit unique from other destinations is that the government decided to give a gift certificate from the government to everyone that is over 18 years old. And everyone that is 18 years old will get a gift certificate of $30 that they can use in Icelandic tourism in the year of 2020. And this just started last week. And there are also other companies that are starting to have like offers and trying to get people to use the gift certificate with them. You also have the domestic campaign that, it's really pushing the industry to update for the domestic market, because in Iceland, we've never really looked at the domestic market. I don't know if the US is the same or in your destinations, but in Iceland, we've never been looking at it. We've always been looking abroad. So it's kind of refreshing to see, Facebook pages popping up about different kind of areas in Iceland and people asking for advice and so on. So this has been a very positive in that sense, that people are really thinking about Iceland as a destination and appreciating the sort of the infrastructure that has been happening in the last few years with the increase in tourism, which has been enormous, as you can see from 2010. If you look at New Zealand, they have this campaign that they call "Do Something New, New Zealand," and apparently this is something that is a beginning of a bigger campaign in the next few months. But the idea is that people are telling about, something that they're taking off the bucket list. So they're really encouraging people to do something new. By, like for Iceland, they're just encouraging people to travel in general. This is really interesting, and there's a link to the video there. And like I said, there's a bit of a different approach. But in this, I think it has been quite positive. And even though it's not mandatory, but the Prime Minister in New Zealand was encouraging businesses to only have a 4 days business week, which is, the idea is that people would then travel over the 3 days weekend. I think this is a really interesting and kind of a nice approach in this. I don't know, and Chris probably knows that better than me, if that actually has been happening, if companies have actually been doing the 4 weeks or not. But it is a positive kind of a thing in my mind. And also, I think, because I've been thinking a lot about this with the domestic travel as well. I know that Miles Partnership has been doing some kind of a benchmark and looking at the domestic marketing and how that's best done. I think it's really interesting to see and wonder if, with increased domestic travel, if it have a positive impact on the sustainable development of the destinations. Because before COVID, we had a lot of conversation on the over-tourism and the destinations and, how we want them to develop for the future. And if you think about it, if you get the domestic traveler to be more of a storyteller for your destination, is it possible that he will be telling more of the story that he wants to be told from his destination, because it's a destination where he lives, where he works, where he will, respects the nature and the environment and so on. So it's just an idea if we can try to sort of harness the domestic traveler more than we've done in the past, or more than I've actually seen, at least in the Nordics. But at last, if we discuss a little bit on the opening of Iceland, we've actually stayed open the whole time. We had flights from London and Stockholm the whole time, but you always had to go into a quarantine when you came to Iceland. But on the 15th of June, there was a new, where we started testing at the borders. And the testing is going to be free until 1st of July, but it's basically, it will cost around $112 US. And it has been going on now for almost 10 days from now on. And but you also have to, it's not mandatory, the testing is mandatory, but it's not mandatory, but you are also asked to download an app where we can follow, or the Icelandic authorities can follow you in Iceland. So in case you're in a place where there is a kind of a infection or something like that going on, they can actually contact you. And majority of Icelandic people have this app in their phones, and I think everyone are kind of happy to do that while we are in this situation. We also have had quite a good team from the Icelandic authorities that has been representing, and like they say, the science has guided the path, and it will continue to do so. That has been the mantra in this, that they're not doing anything that they don't feel safe. But in the end of this, I think also, which is has been quite nice for all of you that are interested in Iceland. Iceland Air is also having a campaign right now that they call Iceland is Open, with the hashtag Iceland is Open, where they are encouraging Icelandic people to showcase what Iceland has to offer and what we are doing right now around the country in our summer vacations, because majority of people right now are traveling around and enjoying the cold Icelandic summer. We have 11 degrees at the moment, but we're always optimistic that it's going to be warmer, but it never is. But like I say, I hope you can ask me questions, and you can stay in touch on my LinkedIn profile. But yeah, and I hope I have given you some kind of insight into this.
Thank you so much, Inga. You mentioned New Zealand there. We are lucky enough to work with a number of New Zealand destinations. And of course, Tourism New Zealand have launched their campaign, Do Something New, New Zealand. And the early results look positive.
Okay.
So domestic travel numbers have rebounded and are quite strong. Events have restarted. So rugby, the national sport in New Zealand, can have full stadiums. And I think the experience to date with New Zealand just really emphasises what Amir pointed out, that this is a health crisis.
Yeah.
If you can get on top of the health issues, so New Zealand's effectively eradicated COVID-19 within its borders. It still has cases coming in that are quarantined on arrival, but if it can maintain that, then it creates this confidence, this sense that you can get out and about. So more important than anything we can do in travel and tourism is talk to our government officials, our health officials about greater investment and greater coordination around tackling the health issue. And I think that's frankly the big gap and issue we have here in the US. So we'll come back to Q&A at the end. I'll just briefly just share a few resources that we've got that we wanted to highlight today. So in terms of upcoming information and webinars, so Destinations International, their iconic annual convention, one of the oldest conventions actually in the tourism and travel industry. It's been running for almost 110 years. It has moved online this year with the impact of COVID-19. We've been a big sponsor and supporter of Destinations International, and as part of that, we actually organise part of the agenda and program that's called Global All Stars. So for the last 9 years, in fact, we're in our 9th year now, we've been featuring the latest in insights, ideas, and innovation from around the world. We're joined by 2 all-stars in the state tourism director category. So Rita McClenny from Virginia, Todd Davidson from across the other side of the United States in Travel Oregon. 2 real thought leaders amongst state tourism. They're going to be looking at 6 ways in which travel and tourism is being reshaped and changed forever by 2020, not just COVID-19, but some of the other big themes and issues that society is confronting at the moment. And backed by popular demand, an alumni from our 2019 edition, Sina Jorgested, who was formerly with Wonderful Copenhagen, now with the Now Group. We've collaborated with them on a number of projects, and I should note they're actually doing a DMO funding project in Europe, and we're collaborating on sharing insights and some of the results into the DMO funding project that you heard John and I summarize before. So Sina's going to be looking at the 5 critical ways in which DMOs need to change and innovate and come out of this crisis with a fresh agenda and mission. In our breakout workshop, Douglas Quimby, formerly with Focusrite, now at Arrival, and they're a real specialist and global leader in the attractions, activities, and tour space. He's going to be providing a gallery of best case examples of businesses that are not only surviving COVID-19, but setting themselves up to thrive in the post-COVID-19 environment. And then we're going to be looking at a particular destination that is a best practice example of recovery, and what are the critical components that the DMO and attractions need to provide to really provide a successful recovery. And talking about Arrival, they've been running a really impactful webinar series of their own, focused on the attraction, activity, and tour space. With our support, they're opening it up to DMOs, and there's actually an opportunity to participate in an upcoming summit this Thursday for free. So you can see you can use that code below to register for free and hear some of the latest thinking around the attractions, activities, and tour space, which of course is an absolutely critical component of any destination. So please take a look at that. Also take a look at our communication center. We've talked about upcoming webinars. Our next webinar will be in a month. We talked about the webinar we'll be running on August 20th with US Travel for the DMO funding project, but we also collate other webinars from partners. We've got the latest research from our 9 research and data partners, and best practices, resources, white papers, and more, all on that COVID-19 website. I've written a blog that we'll be publishing tomorrow in 2 parts. It's called Restarting Tourism. I've looked at 8 essential components of the successful recovery strategy, and it picks up on a number of the themes we've talked about today and collates resources and emphasizing this is a health crisis. You can see this stat. This is actually from Meet the Press on NBC on Sunday, the relative performance of the United States and European Union in grappling with this health crisis. So frankly, the Europeans have got options and opportunities that we do not enjoy in the United States. And so any country needs to deal with that health crisis first and foremost. So without further ado, we'll open it up to questions and answers. I do want to clarify all the slides will be available will be shared out in the follow-up email and the webinar recording as well. So Amir, first question for you, mate. So in terms of the ongoing research, what's the plan? Sue is asking for running the research through the balance of 2020 and beyond.
Yeah, right now our plan is to keep running this as long as it's relevant, and we are doing it on a bi-weekly basis. So next week we'll field it again, and just look for every other Tuesday we'll have the release. And again, thank you to our Chris and the team at Miles for the great partnership on this.
Thank you, and thank you very much for the opportunity to work with you, Amir. Dave is asking, is there an opportunity to suggest custom questions for the research?
Yeah, we actually are rolling out right now a customizable component for individual organizations, destinations, and so forth. In terms of the national question, always feel free to send us your suggestions. And I think my contact info was on there somewhere. And by all means, send us whatever.
Or please reach out to us, and we can. We collaborate with Amir and the team at Longwoods on the custom questions, so if there's suggestions, please contribute them. John, Tim is asking, how does he get hold of a list of the 100 cities that you looked at 2 years ago? And he wanted to know if his city is on it.
First, feel free to email us, the email that we put up earlier, but feel free to do that. Our website, civitasadvisors.com. You can get information off of that. The study itself is free for U.S. travel members, and so you can get on the U.S. travel website and get the study as well there. But if you'd like any details about that, the list of cities and the like, we're happy to share that just by reaching out to us.
Yeah, and I should note there's actually a webinar recording available as well from a webinar you gave about 12-18 months ago on the results of that survey. So you can also see that. That's available on US Travel's website. So Inga, Brooke is asking, with your looking across the world, we saw Denmark, we saw New Zealand, as well as Iceland. What other countries stand out in terms of handling the COVID-19 crisis in a thoughtful, proactive way?
Oh, well, that's a difficult question. Is anyone doing, the perfect situation in this? If I remember it correctly, the Switzerland was doing quite well according to surveys in all of this, and coming out quite well. But I think in many cases we're all learning by doing, and I think it's quite dangerous to say if someone is doing the best in this. I think we're just all trying to cope. But I know that the Nordic countries have, except for Sweden, have had a completely different approach. But the Nordic countries have had a very similar approach in this. But I think also, if I remember it correctly, that East Europe, like Slovenia and those countries, they have not been hit as hard as any other. So they might also have a positive kind of approach in this as well.
Yes, that's right. Slovenia, which it does great work in terms of destination marketing, a real standout. Czech Republic, I think their numbers have been relatively low, and Greece has done a great job.
Yeah, Greece is also, and they've also opened up. Yeah, Greece also has opened up. It was one of the first ones that was opening up. But in the terms of who is doing great, we don't really know that, because it's different between the countries, how they have been testing, how much they have been testing, the approaches, and so on. So do we all actually have accurate numbers in this? That's also something that consider in all of this.
Yes. John, another question for you. And then I've just had another question come in for you, Inga. So Scott's asking, given the critical problem we've got that obviously when we need DMO marketing resources the most is going to be to build the recovery, that's going to be potentially the low point of DMO funding. So has the study identified any solutions for that conundrum?
Well, that certainly is a major difficulty, and I would add to that one other, which is this particular crisis has been so broad, right? So even if you did have, as some DMOs do, a diversified set of funding tools, likely a lot of those funding tools were hit, whether you were looking at sales tax. There are some DMOs that do get funding through a tax increment model, and some of those property tax increments have continued to flow. So there are some things out there that way, but what we're encouraging people to do is look at additional alternatives. So we've had several destinations, for example, pursue like a tourism improvement district or a tourism recovery district, even at a time now, and there are hotels saying, hey, we need to do something. We need to supercharge our way through this recovery, and we know it takes resources to do it. So I think that folks might be surprised in some cases to find that there are people out there that say, yes, we need to do something more and add on to create additional resources, and that's what we would advise people to do.
Yeah, and to that I'd add, John, that you know, we've got obviously an employment crisis that the US is facing. I mentioned the 38% figure in terms of the number of jobs that have been lost in tourism and hospitality out of that greater percentage. So every civic leader is going to be concerned about employment opportunities, and without supercharging tourism's and hospitality's recovery, you cannot deal with your employment crisis in your community or state or county or whatever. So I think
it's so true, Chris. Thank you for that. And I would just add that there are places out there that have either continued their efforts to add supplemental funding or have even recently started their efforts to add supplemental funding. And I'll give a shout out to David Clark in Mobile, Alabama, who got the first tourism improvement district created in Alabama, and he did that, just finalized that just 2 weeks ago. So even in a time of crisis, there is movement, and like I said in my presentation, there's an opportunity with our leaders right now to give us those kinds of policy decisions. And so it's a great time for folks to be looking at that and taking advantage of the window that's open.
Very good. And let's just take one final question. Lily is asking, Inga, now that Iceland's open, how are visitors responding? So are they happily accepting and paying for the COVID-19 test? Are they downloading the app without problems? You know, is there good sort of traveler etiquette and behavior in terms of, you know, how they're traveling around Iceland?
So far, the testing has been free and is going to be free until 1st of July. There have been a lot of discussion that the testing price is too high, and some companies are also trying to compensate that with some kind of a discounts and offers to the travelers that are coming to Iceland. But it remains to be seen if the price is going to affect, how much the price is going to affect. But in my beliefs, if you're going to travel at these times, you want to be secure and you want to have health and safety up front. So if you are going to travel at these times, you're going to be willing to pay something for it to be safe in that sense. But on the other hand, it still needs to be proven. In regards to people being tested and doing everything right, that has been proven to be working very well at this time. And everyone have been, according to the plans, and been responsible and all of that. We've not had any problems so far. But to note, it's only been since the 15th of June, and not all of the destinations have opened up. They will open up on the 1st of July, when the EU and the Schengen will open up more, or to other destinations. So we still have to see how that's going to happen. But I believe that everyone that will be traveling are going to be responsible at this time. So I think, like we all say all the times, we're all in this together. So I don't see the point in people not doing what they're asked for.
Thank you so much. And we're at the top of the hour, so we'll wrap it up with that. Thank you so much to Amir, to Inga, to John for joining us today, your wonderful insights and input. Thank you for joining us. Please reach out with suggestions and input. Use our COVID-19 knowledge portal, and all the very best to you. Stay safe and have a great rest of your day or evening. See you.
Thank you. Bye.
Goodbye.